The small human ship drifted through the dark void of space like a leaf caught in a gentle breeze. Its hull was scratched and dented from months of travel through asteroid fields and cosmic debris. Inside the cramped cockpit, Jake Morrison wiped sweat from his forehead as he checked the navigation systems one more time. The readings showed they were still 3 days away from the nearest human outpost. Jake was a big man with calloused hands and a weathered face that told stories of years spent working underground. Back on Earth, he had spent 20 years digging coal from the mountains of West Virginia. The mines had been dangerous work, filled with toxic gases and the constant threat of cave-ins. But when the coal industry died, Jake had looked to the stars for his next adventure. Space exploration paid well, and the work reminded him of his mining days in all the best ways. His crew was small, but reliable. Lisa Carter sat at the engineering console, her blonde hair tied back in a practical ponytail. She had learned to fix engines in her father's garage before moving on to spacecraft propulsion systems. Pete Johnson monitored the communication equipment from his station near the back of the ship. He was quiet, but dependable, the kind of man who could fix anything with enough time and the right tools. The three of them had been partners for 2 years now, mapping unexplored systems and looking for valuable minerals. It was honest work, and they split the profits equally. Jake liked it better than the corporate mining operations where bosses in clean suits made decisions about safety from comfortable offices. "Jake, I'm picking up something on the long-range scanners," Lisa called out from her station. Her voice carried a note of concern that made Jake look up from his charts. "What kind of something?" Jake asked, moving over to look at her screen. The display showed a cluster of large objects moving in their direction at high speed. 5 ships, maybe. 6. "They're big, and they're not broadcasting any identification signals," Lisa replied, adjusting the scanner settings to get a clearer picture. Pete turned away from his communication console and frowned. "I'm not getting any response on the standard frequencies. Either they're not interested in talking or they don't use the same communication systems we do." Jake felt a familiar knot form in his stomach. In the mines, that feeling usually meant trouble was coming. "How long until they reach us?" "At their current speed, maybe 10 minutes, Lisa answered. Jake moved back to the pilot's seat and began running through their options. Their little exploration ship was not built for fighting. It had basic shields and no weapons beyond a mining laser that was meant for cutting through rock, not enemy ships. Running was their best option, but the approaching vessels were already moving faster than their maximum speed. "Try sending them a message on all frequencies," Jake ordered. "Tell them we're peaceful explorers from Earth and that we're not looking for any trouble." Pete's fingers moved quickly over his controls as he sent out the broadcast. They waited in tense silence for a response. The approaching ships continued on their course without slowing down or changing direction. "Nothing," Pete reported after several minutes. "Either they can't understand us or they're choosing not to respond." The ships appeared on their visual display as dark, angular shapes that looked nothing like human vessels. They were covered in sharp edges and strange protrusions that made them look more like weapons than transportation. As they drew closer, Jake could see that each ship was at least 3 times the size of his own vessel. "Jake, they're surrounding us," Lisa said, her voice tight with worry. The alien ships had spread out in a wide circle around the human vessel, cutting off any escape routes. Jake had seen similar tactics used by pirates in the outer systems, but these ships moved with military precision that suggested they were dealing with something much more organized and dangerous. "All stop," Jake ordered, knowing that resistance would be pointless. "Power down the engines but keep life support and communications active." A bright beam of light suddenly locked onto their ship from one of the alien vessels. Jake felt a strange tingling sensation pass through his body, and all of their electronic systems flickered for a moment before returning to normal. "They're scanning us," Pete said, checking his instruments. "Deep scan too, not just surface readings." Lisa looked at her engineering displays and shook her head. "They're using technology I've never seen before. Whatever they just did, it went right. Through our shields like they weren't even there." The scanning beam shut off, and for a few moments everything was quiet. Then their communication system crackled to life with a voice that sounded like gravel being crushed in a metal tube. "Human vessel, you will prepare to be boarded. Any resistance will result in the destruction of your ship." The voice spoke perfect English, but there was something wrong with the pronunciation that made Jake's skin crawl. It sounded like someone trying to speak while breathing poisonous gas. "Well, that answers the question about whether they understand us," Pete muttered. Jake keyed the communication system. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the exploration vessel New Horizon. We're peaceful civilians conducting scientific research. We have no weapons and pose no threat to you." The response came back immediately. "You will surrender your vessel and submit to capture. This is not a negotiation." Jake looked at his crew. Lisa's face was pale but determined. Pete was already shutting down non-essential systems to prevent the aliens from accessing their computer files. They were good people, and Jake felt responsible for getting them into this situation. "Understood," Jake replied. "We're powering down our systems now." One of the alien ships moved closer until it was almost touching their hull. Jake could see strange symbols carved into its surface, and what looked like viewing ports that glowed with an eerie green light. The ship was beautiful in a deadly way, like a sword made from black crystal. A loud clanging sound echoed through their vessel as something attached to their airlock. The aliens were coming aboard, and there was nothing Jake and his crew could do to stop them. "Stay calm and follow my lead," Jake told Lisa and Pete. "We've been in tight spots before and we've always found a way out." The airlock hissed open, and Jake got his first look at their captors. The aliens were tall and thin, with crystalline skin that reflected light in strange patterns. They wore no clothing, but their bodies were covered in natural armor that looked like it had grown rather than been manufactured. Their faces were angular and sharp, with large eyes that glowed the same green color as their ship's viewing ports. 6 of the creatures entered the ship, moving with a fluid grace that reminded Jake of hunting cats. They carried weapons that hummed with energy and looked like they could cut through steel without effort. The leader of the group stepped forward and studied Jake with obvious curiosity. When it spoke, Jake could see that its mouth was filled with rows of needle-sharp teeth. "I am Commander Vex of the Zephyrian Empire. You and your crew are now prisoners of war." Jake had never heard of the Zephyrian Empire, but the alien's tone made it clear that this was not going to be a friendly cultural exchange. "War?" Jake asked. "We're not at war with anyone." The alien commander made a sound that might have been laughter. "Your species exists in our territory without permission. That is an act of war. You will come with us to face judgment for your crimes." Jake realized that they had stumbled into something much bigger and more dangerous than a simple case of mistaken identity. These aliens saw humans as invaders in space that Jake had thought was empty and unclaimed. The Zephyrians bound Jake and his crew with restraints that felt like liquid metal, but held them as securely as chains. Then they were marched through the connecting tunnel onto the alien ship, leaving their own vessel behind like an abandoned shell. The inside of the Zephyrian ship was unlike anything Jake had ever seen. The walls curved and twisted in impossible angles, covered in the same crystalline material as the alien skin. Strange lights pulsed through the structure like a heartbeat, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move on their own. The air smelled sharp and metallic, with an underlying scent that reminded Jake of burning sulfur. Commander Vex led the 3 humans through a maze of corridors that seemed to go on forever. Other Zephyrians stopped their work to stare at the prisoners as they passed. Jake noticed that many of them carried weapons and all of them had the same predatory look in their glowing green eyes. These were not peaceful explorers. They were warriors, and Jake could feel the danger radiating from them like heat from a furnace. Lisa walked close behind Jake, her hands bound, but her head held high. She had always been brave, even as a child working in her father's garage. Pete brought up the rear, his eyes constantly moving as he tried to memorize the layout of the ship. Jake knew his friend was already thinking about escape routes, even though their situation looked hopeless. The corridor opened into a massive chamber that took Jake's breath away. The room was circular and huge, with a ceiling that stretched up so high it disappeared into darkness. Dozens of Zephyrians filled the space, all of them turning to watch as the humans were brought in. The walls were covered in weapons and trophies that Jake realized must have come from other conquered species. In the center of the chamber stood a raised platform where the largest Zephyrian Jake had ever seen waited for them. This one was different from the others. His crystalline skin was darker, almost black, and covered in scars that told stories of countless battles. When he moved, the other aliens stepped back in obvious respect and fear. "Warlord Thexkar," Commander Vex said, bowing low before the massive alien. "I present the human prisoners as you commanded." Thexkar stepped down from his platform and circled around Jake and his crew like a shark studying its prey. His eyes glowed brighter than the others, and when he breathed, Jake could see vapor rising from his mouth like steam from a hot engine. "So these are the humans we have heard whispers about," Thexkar said, his voice like grinding stone. "They look weak, soft. I expected something more impressive from a species that dares to enter our territory." Jake kept his mouth shut, but he could feel anger building in his chest. He had dealt with bullies before, both in the mines and in the rough bars where miners went to drink after work. Thexkar was just another bully, bigger and more dangerous than most, but still someone who used fear to control others. "Your species will serve as an example," Thexkar continued, moving closer to Jake until they were almost touching. "When word spreads of what happens to those who defy the Zephyrian Empire, other races will think twice before entering our space." The warlord stepped back and raised his arms to address the gathered crowd. "Today, you will witness the power of our most sacred weapon. The fear mist has broken the will of 100 different species. It turns the strongest warriors into crying children. It makes proud leaders beg for mercy." The crowd of Zephyrians began to make a noise that sounded like hissing mixed with clicking. Jake realized they were cheering, excited to see what was about to happen. Several of them moved to the edges of the chamber and began operating strange machines that hummed with energy. "The fear mist contains the essence of death itself," Thexkar explained to his audience. "It carries the smell of decay, the taste of poison, the feeling of suffocation. No living creature can breathe it without being overcome by terror. It reminds every species of their deepest fears and darkest nightmares." Jake felt his stomach tighten. He had heard of chemical weapons before, gases that could kill or disable enemies without warning. During his mining days, he had always been careful around dangerous gases, knowing that one wrong breath could mean death. But he also knew that miners developed a tolerance for many of the gases they encountered. What seemed deadly to others was often just another day at work for someone who had spent years underground. A section of the floor began to rise, revealing a clear chamber just big enough to hold one person. The walls were thick and transparent, designed to contain whatever was put inside while allowing the audience to watch. Jake realized with a cold certainty that the chamber was meant for him. "You," Thexkar said, pointing one clawed finger at Jake. "You will be the first to experience our hospitality." Two Zephyrian guards grabbed Jake by the arms and began dragging him toward the chamber. He did not resist, knowing that fighting would only make things worse for Lisa and Pete. As they moved him across the floor, he caught Lisa's eye and gave her a small nod, trying to tell her without words that everything would be all right. The chamber door slid open with a soft hiss, and the guards pushed Jake inside. The space was cramped and uncomfortable, barely large enough for him to stand upright. Through the clear walls, he could see the excited faces of the Zephyrian audience as they gathered closer to get a better view. Thexkar moved to a control panel covered in strange symbols and began pressing buttons. "The fear mist is stored in its purest form," he announced to the crowd. "One breath is enough to break most creatures. 3 breaths will leave them begging for death." Jake looked around the chamber and noticed small vents near the floor that were obviously designed to release gas into the space. He took a deep breath of clean air and tried to prepare himself for whatever was coming. In the mines, he had always been taught to stay calm when dealing with dangerous gases. Panic would only make things worse. Let this be a lesson to all who would challenge the Zephyrian Empire, Thexkar declared as his finger hovered over a final button. "We are the masters of fear itself." The warlord pressed the button and Jake heard a soft hissing sound as gas began to flow into the chamber. The Zephyrians pressed closer to the walls, eager to see him collapse in terror. Thexkar watched with obvious satisfaction, already imagining the fear and desperation he expected to see on Jake's face. The gas was thick and green, swirling around Jake's feet like fog rolling across a swamp. It rose quickly, reaching his waist and then his chest. The smell hit him just as the gas reached his nose, and Jake's eyes widened in surprise. The crowd of Zephyrians leaned forward, expecting to see the first signs of panic and terror. Instead, they watched in confusion as a smile spread across Jake's face. He took a deep breath of the fear mist and closed his eyes like someone enjoying the aroma of fresh-baked bread. "Well, I'll be damned," Jake said loud enough for everyone to hear. His voice carried no trace of fear or pain. Instead, he sounded pleased and nostalgic, like someone who had just encountered an old friend. Thexkar stared at the human in disbelief. This was not how the fear mist was supposed to work. Every other species had collapsed within seconds of breathing the gas. Some had died from the shock of their own terror. But this human was smiling and breathing the deadly vapor like it was nothing more than morning air. "This brings me right back," Jake continued, taking another deep breath. "Smells just like home. You know, I haven't had a good whiff of sulfur and methane like this in years. Takes me straight back to the mines in West Virginia." The chamber was now completely filled with the green gas, but Jake showed no signs of distress. If anything, he seemed more relaxed than before. He leaned against one wall of the chamber like someone enjoying a pleasant break from work. The Zephyrian audience fell silent, their excited clicking and hissing replaced by confused murmurs. This was not what they had expected to see. Their most powerful weapon, the fear mist that had conquered countless worlds, was being treated like a pleasant reminder of home by this strange human. Thexkar's glowing eyes narrowed as he stared at Jake through the chamber walls. Something was very wrong, and the warlord was beginning to realize that he might have seriously underestimated these humans. The silence in the great chamber stretched on like a held breath. Hundreds of Zephyrian warriors stared at the human in the gas-filled chamber, their minds struggling to process what they were seeing. Their most feared weapon, the terror mist, that had brought entire civilizations to their knees, was being enjoyed by this strange creature like a pleasant childhood memory. Thexkar's claws scraped against the control panel as he gripped it tighter, his scarred face twisted with confusion and growing anger. In all his years of conquest, he had never seen anything like this. The fear mist was supposed to be absolute. It was supposed to work on every living thing. Increase the concentration, he growled to the technician operating the gas controls. The technician's crystalline fingers moved quickly over the controls, and more gas poured into the chamber. The green mist became so thick that it was hard to see Jake through the swirling clouds. But his voice came through clearly, still calm and conversational. "Oh, that's even better," Jake said, breathing deeply. "You really got the mixture right. Most people don't understand that it's not just about the sulfur. You need that hint of methane to give it character. And is that a touch of hydrogen sulfide I'm detecting? Beautiful work." Lisa and Pete watched from where they stood with their guards, their faces showing a mixture of relief and amazement. They had known Jake for years and had heard his stories about the mines, but seeing him react this way to what was obviously a deadly weapon was something else entirely. Commander Vex stepped closer to his warlord. "Sir, perhaps the gas is defective. We should test it on the other humans to make sure." Thexkar's eyes never left Jake as he considered this. "No, the gas is working perfectly. I can smell it from here, and it carries the proper scent of death and decay. This human is simply reacting differently than expected." Jake heard this exchange and chuckled. "Death and decay? Is that what you think this smells like? Brother, you've been living in space too long. This smells like honest work and good living. This smells like the place where real men earn their bread." The human pressed his hands against the chamber wall and looked directly at Thexkar. "You want to know what this reminds me of? Let me tell you about Earth, about the world we come from." Without waiting for permission, Jake began to speak. His voice carried clearly through the chamber, and every Zephyrian present found themselves listening despite their confusion. "I grew up in the mountains of West Virginia, in a place where the air was never clean and the ground was never steady. My father worked in the coal mines, and his father before him and his father before that. We dug deep into the earth, following veins of coal through tunnels that stretched for miles underground. Jake took another breath of the gas, and his smile grew wider. Every day we'd go down into those mines knowing that the air might kill us. Methane gas, carbon monoxide, hydrogen sulfide, all sorts of things that could drop a man in his tracks. But we learned to live with it. We learned to smell the difference between safe air and dangerous air. We learned that sometimes the air that smells the worst is just part of the job. Thexkar found himself leaning forward, drawn into the human story despite himself. Your people work in poisonous environments willingly? Willingly, Jake laughed. We don't just work in them, we live in them. Our cities are built next to chemical plants and steel mills. We burn fossil fuels in our cars and factories. We pump smoke and gas into our own atmosphere every day. What you call a weapon, we call Tuesday. A murmur went through the crowd of Zephyrians. This was not making sense to them. Why would any species deliberately poison their own environment? But that's not even the interesting part, Jake continued. See, humans don't just tolerate hostile environments. We seek them out. We climb mountains where the air is so thin it can kill you. We dive to the bottom of oceans where the pressure would crush most creatures. We build settlements in deserts, where the temperature can cook you alive, and in frozen wastelands where everything stops working. Pete nodded from where he stood with the guards. My grandfather worked in a chemical plant in New Jersey for 40 years. He used to say the air there was so thick you could chew it. But he raised 6 kids on that job and lived to be 93. Lisa added her own memory. My dad's auto shop was in Detroit, right next to a steel mill. The air was yellow most days, and you could taste metal just by breathing. But that's where I learned to love engines and machinery. That's where I learned that you don't let a little bad air stop you from doing good work. Thexkar's mind was reeling. These humans were describing a world that sounded like a nightmare to him. The Zephyrians had evolved on a world with clean air and perfect conditions. They had never had to adapt to hostile environments. They had conquered other worlds by making them uninhabitable for their enemies. You're telling me that your entire species has adapted to live in conditions that would kill most other life forms? The warlord asked. Adapted? Jake shook his head. We didn't just adapt. We thrived. We turned hostile environments into advantages. The same gases that you use as weapons, we use as fuel. The same conditions that terrify other species, we use to power our civilization. Commander Vex spoke up, his voice uncertain. But surely you must have some fear. All creatures fear something. Jake thought about this for a moment, still breathing the terror mist like it was mountain air. Oh, we have fears, all right. But they're probably not what you'd expect. What do humans fear? Thexakar asked, and Jake could hear genuine curiosity in the alien's voice. Boredom, Jake said immediately. Nothing scares a human more than sitting around with nothing to do. We're built for action, for solving problems, for facing challenges. Put us in a completely safe, peaceful environment with no problems to solve, and we'll go crazy within a week. Lisa nodded. That's why we became explorers. Earth was getting too safe, too predictable. We needed to find new challenges, new problems, to solve. And silence, Pete added. Dead silence makes us nervous. We're used to noise, to machinery running, to things happening. Too much quiet, and we start looking for something to fix or build or improve. The Zephyrians looked at each other in amazement. These humans were describing fears that made no sense to them. The Zephyrians valued peace and quiet. They enjoyed safe, controlled environments. The idea of a species that feared safety and craved danger was completely alien to them. So when you put me in here with your terror mist, Jake continued, you're not scaring me. You're reminding me of home. You're reminding me of the place where I learned to work hard and solve problems. This gas doesn't smell like death to me. It smells like opportunity. Thexkar stared at the human for a long moment, his mind working through the implications of what he was hearing. If these humans were telling the truth, then the Zephyrian Empire had encountered something unprecedented, a species that found comfort in what should be instruments of torture, a species that had turned environmental hostility into a strength rather than a weakness. "Turn off the gas," he ordered quietly. The technician looked confused. "Sir, the test is not complete. We haven't reached maximum concentration yet." "Turn it off," Thexkar repeated, his voice carrying the authority of absolute command. The flow of gas stopped, and ventilation systems began clearing the chamber. As the green mist dissipated, Jake became fully visible again. He was still standing, upright, still smiling, completely unharmed by exposure to concentrated terror mist that should have killed him 3 times over. "Thanks for that," Jake said as the chamber door opened. "I haven't felt that relaxed in months. You wouldn't happen to have any more of that, would you? Maybe something I could take back to my ship?" Thexkar realized that everything he knew about warfare, about fear, about conquest itself, might be completely wrong when it came to these humans. Word of the failed terror mist test spread through the Zephyrian ship like wildfire. Warriors who had not witnessed the event firsthand refused to believe the reports. The terror mist was their ultimate weapon, the foundation of their military, but it could not have failed against a single human. Thexkar stood in his private chambers, staring out at the stars through a crystalline window. His reflection showed a warrior who had conquered 47 worlds who had never known defeat. But now doubt crept through his mind like poison. If the terror mist did not work on humans, what else might fail? Commander Vex entered without, knocking, something he would never have dared to do under normal circumstances. "Sir, the crew is demanding answers. They want to know why the human was not affected." "Bring me the other humans," Thexkar ordered. "All of them. If one human can resist the terror mist, perhaps it was a fluke. We will test them all." Within minutes, Lisa and Pete were brought to the great chamber. The crowd of Zephyrian warriors had grown even larger, with aliens from every section of the ship coming to witness what they hoped would be a return to normal. Surely the first human had been defective somehow. These new tests would prove that the terror mist still worked. Lisa was placed in the gas chamber first. She looked nervous as the door sealed shut, but Jake called out to her from where he stood with his guards. "Don't worry, Lisa, just think about your dad's garage. Remember that smell of motor oil and exhaust fumes." The terror mist began to fill the chamber, and Lisa took her first breath of the green gas. The Zephyrians watched eagerly, expecting to see the fear and panic they were used to. Instead, Lisa's tense expression relaxed into a smile of recognition. "Oh my God," she said, breathing deeply. "This is incredible. Jake, it really does smell like home." She pressed her hands against the chamber walls and looked out at the confused alien faces. "This takes me right back to my father's auto shop. In Detroit, we had this old Buick that burned oil something terrible and the exhaust system leaked right into the work bay. I spent every afternoon after school in that garage, breathing fumes just like this." The crowd of Zephyrians began to murmur nervously. 2 humans now had shown no fear of their ultimate weapon. This could not be coincidence. "More gas," Thexkar ordered, his voice tight with frustration. The concentration increased, but Lisa only seemed to enjoy it more. "You know what this reminds me of? That chemical plant outside of town where my uncle worked. During the summer, when the wind was right, you could smell it for miles. My friends thought it was awful, but I always loved that smell. It meant people were working, making things, building the future." Lisa was released from the chamber completely unharmed, still smiling. Pete was brought forward next, and the same process repeated. When the terror mist filled his chamber, he closed his eyes and took a deep breath. "New Jersey," he said with obvious pleasure. "This smells exactly like the refineries back home. My father worked at one for 30 years. Every morning when I was a kid, I'd smell this exact scent on his work clothes when he came home from the night shift." Pete continued, talking as the gas swirled around him. "People always complained about the air quality where we lived, but I never understood why. This is the smell of industry, of progress. This is what it smells like when humans are building something important. 3 humans, 3 complete failures of the terror mist." The Zephyrian crowd was no longer excited. Now they looked worried, uncertain. Their whispered conversations filled the chamber with a sound like wind through broken glass. Thexkar felt something he had not experienced in decades of warfare, Fear. Not fear of death or pain, but fear of the unknown. These humans represented something outside his understanding, something that challenged everything he believed about conquest and control. "Release them," he ordered. Commander Vex stared at his leader in shock. "Sir?" "Release all 3 humans. Bring them to the strategy chamber. I need to understand what we are dealing with." The strategy chamber was smaller than the Great Hall, designed for planning battles rather than public spectacles. Thexkar sat across a crystalline table from Jake, Lisa, and Pete, studying them like specimens he could not identify. Other high-ranking Zephyrian officers filled the remaining seats, all of them staring at the humans with mixtures of curiosity and concern. "Explain to me how this is possible," Thexkar said finally. "The terror mist contains compounds specifically designed to trigger fear responses in all known forms of life. It should have killed you within minutes." Jake leaned back in his chair, more relaxed than he had been since their capture. The failure of the terror mist had shifted the balance of power in the room, and everyone present could feel it. "I think the problem is that you don't understand what humans consider scary," Jake said. "You've been testing your weapon on species that evolved in safe, comfortable environments. We didn't have that luxury." "Tell us about your world," Commander Vex said, leaning forward with genuine interest. Pete spoke up first. "Earth is what you might call a hostile environment. The atmosphere is 21% oxygen, which is highly reactive and toxic to many forms of life. We have weather systems that can generate winds over 200 miles per hour. Earthquakes that can level entire cities. Volcanoes that can change the climate for years. And that's just the natural disasters," Lisa added. "We've been dealing with pollution and toxic chemicals for centuries. The air in our cities would probably be poisonous to most species, but we've adapted to it. Our children grow up breathing it." Jake nodded. "The thing you have to understand is that humans don't just survive in hostile environments. We thrive in them. We seek them out. Some of our most successful settlements are built in places that would kill most other species. We build cities in swamps full of disease-carrying insects," Pete said. "We live in deserts where the temperature can reach over 120 degrees. We work in mines thousands of feet underground, surrounded by poisonous gases and the constant threat of cave-ins. Our ancestors survived ice ages, plagues, and countless natural disasters," Lisa continued. "Every generation faced challenges that should have wiped us out, but instead we got stronger. We learned to adapt, to overcome, to turn problems into opportunities." Thexkar was beginning to understand. "You're saying that what we consider weapons of terror, you consider normal environmental conditions." "Exactly," Jake said. "Your terror mist smells like the industrial heartland where millions of humans live and work every day. It's not scary to us. It's familiar. It's the smell of human civilization." "But surely you must have weaknesses," another Zephyrian officer interjected. "All species have something they fear." Jake thought about this carefully. "We do have fears, but they're probably not what you'd expect. We fear stagnation. We fear having nothing to do, no problems to solve, no challenges to overcome. Put a human in a completely safe, boring environment, and they'll find ways to make it dangerous and interesting." "We fear losing our purpose," Lisa added. "Humans need to feel useful, to feel like they're contributing something meaningful. Take that away, and we become miserable very quickly." "And we fear betrayal," Pete said quietly. "We can handle physical danger, environmental hazards, even deadly enemies. But being betrayed by someone we trust, that hits us where it hurts." The Zephyrian officers exchanged glances. These fears were completely different from what they were used to exploiting. How do you terrorize a species that finds comfort in what should be instruments of death? How do you conquer people who see hostile environments as opportunities rather than threats? Thexkar realized that the Zephyrian Empire had encountered something unprecedented. These humans were not just another species to be conquered. They were something entirely new, something that might require a completely different approach. "What do you want from us?" he asked finally. Jake looked at his companions, then back at the Zephyrian warlord. "We want to go home. We're explorers, not conquerors." We were just mapping this sector when your ships found us. We have no interest in fighting your empire or challenging your territory. But, Jake continued, and his voice carried a note of steel that made several Zephyrians shift uncomfortably. We won't be intimidated or terrorized either. We've survived worse than anything you've shown us so far. If you want to fight us, we'll fight back. If you want to trade with us, we're open to negotiation, but don't expect us to cower in fear because that's just not who we are. The room fell silent as the implications of Jake's words sank in. The Zephyrian Empire had built its power on fear and intimidation. But what happened when they encountered a species that simply refused to be afraid? The tension in the strategy chamber was thick enough to cut with a knife. Thexkar stared at the three humans across the table, his mind racing through possibilities he had never considered before. In all his years of conquest, he had never encountered a species that simply refused to be afraid. The terror mist was supposed to be absolute, final, unbeatable. Yet these humans had breathed it like perfume and asked for more. You speak of fighting back, Thexkar said slowly. But you have no weapons, no ships, no army. How exactly would your species resist the might of the Zephyrian Empire? Jake smiled, and there was something in that expression that made several Zephyrian officers shift uncomfortably. You're thinking like a traditional military commander. You're thinking about ships and weapons and armies. But that's not how humans fight our best wars. What do you mean? Commander Vex asked. Lisa leaned forward. We're engineers, inventors, problem solvers. You show us a challenge, and we'll find 3 different ways to beat it. You block one path, and we'll dig a tunnel. You poison the air, and we'll build filters. You try to scare us, and we'll turn your weapons into tools. Pete nodded. Back on Earth, we have a saying. When life gives you lemons, make lemonade. When the environment tries to kill you, find a way to make it work for you instead. Your terror, mist, for example, Jake said. You use it as a weapon. But to us, it smells like the industrial processes we use to manufacture everything from plastics to pharmaceuticals. We could probably figure out how to synthesize it ourselves and use it to power our factories. The Zephyrian officers looked at each other with growing alarm. They were beginning to understand that humans did not think like other species. Where most creatures saw obstacles, humans saw opportunities. Where others saw weapons, humans saw resources. But more than that, Jake continued, humans have something that might be even more dangerous than any weapon. We have curiosity. We want to know how things work, why they work, and how to make them work better. Right now, I'm looking at your ship, your technology, your entire civilization, and I'm thinking about all the things we could learn from each other. Thexkar felt a chill run down his crystalline spine. You want to study us? Oh, we definitely want to study you, Lisa said with enthusiasm. Your ship technology is incredible. The way you've grown these crystalline structures, the energy systems you use, the artificial gravity generators. Earth scientists would give anything to understand how this all works. And in return, Pete added, we could share our own knowledge. Human engineering, human manufacturing techniques, human problem-solving methods. Imagine what we could build together. No, Thexkar said firmly. The Zephyrian Empire does not make partnerships with inferior species. We conquer or we destroy. Those are the only options. Jake's smile faded slightly. See, that's where you're making a mistake. You're assuming we're inferior because we don't have your technology or your military might. But superiority isn't just about weapons and ships. It's about adaptability, creativity, and the will to survive. Your empire has conquered 47 worlds, Lisa said, and the fact that she knew this number surprised the Zephyrians. But how many of those conquests involved species that actually fought back effectively? How many of them adapted to your tactics and found ways to turn your own weapons against you? Pete looked around the room at the alien faces. I'm guessing, not many. You've been picking on species that fit your understanding of warfare, species that could be broken by fear and intimidation. But what happens when you encounter someone who doesn't break? Thexkar was quiet for a long moment, considering the implications of what the humans were saying. Finally, he spoke. What are you proposing? Let us go, Jake said simply. Release our ship, and allow us to return to human space. We'll report back that we encountered the Zephyrian Empire and that you were reasonable beings who preferred diplomacy to conflict. And if we refuse? Commander Vex asked. Jake's expression became serious. Then we become your problem. You can try to hold us prisoner, but humans are very good at escaping from places they're not supposed to be. You can try to execute us, but that would mean declaring war on our entire species. And trust me, you don't want to fight a war against humans. Why? Thexkar demanded. What makes humans so dangerous in war? Because we don't fight fair, Pete said bluntly. We don't line up in neat formations and exchange fire according to honor codes. We hide. We ambush. We sabotage. We turn your own infrastructure against you. We fight dirty and we fight smart. Lisa nodded. And we never give up, ever. You can beat us in 100 battles, but we'll keep coming back with new tactics, new weapons, new strategies. We'll adapt to everything you throw at us and find ways to make it work in our favor. Plus, Jake added, humans have a tendency to unite when faced with an external threat. Right now, our species is scattered across dozens of star systems, mostly focused on our own local concerns. But if the Zephyrian Empire started attacking human colonies, you'd unite us into something much more dangerous than we are apart. Thexakar stood up and began pacing around the room. Everything the humans were saying challenged his fundamental understanding of how conquest worked. The Zephyrian way was simple. Intimidate the enemy into submission, rule through fear, maintain control through terror. But what if the enemy refused to be intimidated? There is another option, Jake said quietly. What option? Thexkar asked. Trade. Mutual cooperation. Cultural exchange. Your empire has 47 conquered worlds, but how much do you really gain from ruling through fear? How much innovation? How much progress? How much growth do you lose when your subjects are too afraid to think creatively? Jake stood up and walked over to one of the crystalline walls. This technology you have, it's beautiful and functional, but I bet there are improvements that could be made, problems that could be solved, new applications that could be discovered. Humans are very good at taking existing technology and finding new ways to use it. And your terror mist? Lisa added. Instead of using it as a weapon, we could help you find peaceful applications. Industrial processes, medical treatments, atmospheric processing for terraforming. There are probably dozens of uses you've never considered. Pete joined them by the wall. The universe is a big place with a lot of challenges. Climate control, resource extraction, space travel, energy production. Why waste time fighting each other when we could be working together to solve real problems? Thexkar stopped pacing and looked at the three humans. They were not begging for their lives or trying to bargain from a position of weakness. Instead, they were offering partnership, cooperation, mutual benefit. It was a completely foreign concept to a warrior who had built his career on conquest and domination. You would trust us? He asked. After we captured you, threatened you, tried to terrorize you into submission? Jake shrugged. People make mistakes. What matters is what you do next. You can choose to see humans as enemies to be conquered or as partners who might help your empire grow in ways you never imagined. Commander Vex spoke up. Sir, if we release them, they could return with human warships. This could be a trap. It could be, Jake agreed. But it's not. We're explorers, not military commanders. If we go back and report that the Zephyrian Empire is open to peaceful contact, that's what our government will pursue. If we report that you're hostile and aggressive, well, that's what they'll prepare for. Thexkar made his decision. You will be escorted back to your ship. You will leave our territory immediately and not return without permission. If we detect any human military vessels in our space, we will consider it an act of war. Fair enough, Jake said, extending his hand. But keep our offer in mind. When you're ready to try something different to see what cooperation might accomplish, you know where to find us. Thexkar looked at the offered hand, a human gesture of agreement and respect. After a moment's hesitation, he reached out and grasped it with his own clawed appendage. As the humans were escorted back to their ship, Jake turned to Lisa and Pete. Think they'll take us up on the offer? Lisa smiled. Give them time. Once they realize that ruling through fear has its limitations, they might start looking for alternatives. Pete nodded. And if not, at least we've given them something to think about. Something that might make them reconsider the next time they encounter humans. Their small ship was released, and they began the journey back to human space. Behind them, Thexkar stood in his command chamber staring at the stars and wondering if perhaps there was more than one way to build an empire after all.